The Winter Silence. Berlin, 1942. Snow fell endlessly that winter, as if heaven itself mourned the city below. Berlin had lost its music. Its streets echoed only with the rhythm of marching boots and the cries of mothers who no longer waited by their windows. Inside a grand but broken manor on the edge of the city, Captain Erich Adler arrived with his regiment. He was a man forged by war, tall, broad-shouldered, eyes of steel, expression unreadable. His reputation preceded him, ruthless in battle, loyal to command, yet eerily silent when others laughed. The manor, once home to a prominent Jewish family, was now a military quarter. Chandeliers hung shattered. Dust coated the portraits, and under those same marble floors, history whispered. Of dinners once elegant, of laughter long vanished. Eric walked through the vast hall, his boots echoing sharply. Everything around him smelled of burnt wood and ghosts. He paused by a grand piano in the corner, its lid half open, keys yellowed by time. He was about to order it removed when he heard it, a sound so faint it might have been a dream. A note, then another, soft, delicate, defiant. Someone was playing the piano. His hand went to his pistol. He followed the sound through the corridor, past broken doors and fading wallpaper, until he reached the far drawing room. And there, amid candlelight and snowlight, sat a girl. Her hair fell loose around her shoulders, golden like the dying sun. Her skin was pale as porcelain, and her fingers, trembling yet graceful, glided across the piano keys. The music she played, Clair de Lune, rose like a prayer, fragile and beautiful against the ruin of war. Eric froze. He should have spoken. He should have shouted, demanded her papers, arrested her. But instead, he stood there, every breath caught between disbelief and wonder. The girl turned her head slightly, sensing him. Her eyes, blue, hauntingly blue, met his. For a long moment. Neither moved. Then, softly, she said, "You shouldn't be here." Eric's voice, when it came, was hoarse. "Nor should you." She stopped playing, her hands hovering above the keys. The silence that followed was heavier than the war outside. "What's your name?" he asked. "Elena," she replied, after a pause. Elena Weiss. The name struck him like a memory he had tried to bury. Weiss, the family who had once owned this estate, declared enemies of the Reich, erased from existence months ago. "You're supposed to be gone." She finished for him, a faint smile ghosting her lips. Yes, that was the plan. Eric took a cautious step closer, lowering his weapon. "If anyone finds you here, then let them," she whispered. "I have nowhere else to go." He stared at her, at the fragile defiance in her face, the unspoken grief in her voice, and for the first time in years, the soldier inside him faltered. He should have left. He should have called the guards, but something, perhaps the same madness that drives men to love what they are forbidden to touch, kept him rooted. Elena looked back at the piano and whispered, "Do you know this piece?" "Debussy," he murmured. "My mother used to play it, before the war." For the first time their worlds, the conqueror and the conquered, shared a breath. Outside, the wind howled, like a wounded thing. Inside, two enemies sat in silence, divided by everything but humanity. When the final note faded, Eric whispered almost to himself, "You shouldn't be alive." And Elena looked at him, eyes glistening with something between courage and surrender. "Neither should you." That night, Eric didn't report her. He told no one what he had found. But he returned, again and again, drawn not by duty, but by the sound of her music, and by the unbearable truth that in a world built on hatred, he had found something pure and doomed to love. Berlin had stopped breathing. The air itself had turned to smoke and whispers. Everything was watched, recorded, suspected. Even the stars seemed afraid to shine over the city that devoured its own soul. Yet within the abandoned Weiss Manor, music bloomed again. Every night, when curfew cloaked the city in silence, Captain Erich Adler returned, alone, unseen. He told himself it was only to ensure the house remained secure. But in truth, he came for the girl who made the piano weep. Elena Weiss had learned to live between shadows. Her days were spent in silence, her nights in melody. She played softly, Not for the world, but for herself, for the ghosts of her family, for the dream that music could still exist when everything human had died. At first, Eric stood at the door, listening like a thief. Then gradually, he began to step closer, until one night, he stood beside her. "You shouldn't play so loudly," he whispered. "Sound travels. So does guilt," she replied, not looking up. He had no answer to that. The days turned into weeks. Their conversations were few, often broken, always careful. But between every word, something unspoken bloomed, fragile, dangerous, sacred. Sometimes she asked him questions no one else dared to ask. "How do you serve a flag you don't believe in? You confuse belief with obedience," he said quietly. "One keeps you alive, the other gets you killed. And love? Love," he hesitated, "that gets you both." One evening, she played Moonlight Sonata. He sat nearby, ungloved, the fire casting restless shadows across his uniform. When the music faded, she asked softly, "What do you see when you look at me, Captain?" He didn't answer. His throat felt dry, his heart far too human. Finally, he said, "I see everything I was ordered to destroy." The silence that followed was unbearable. She turned back to the piano, her hands trembling slightly. "And yet you stay." "Yes," he breathed. "God help me, I stay." That was the first night he touched her hand. Only for a moment. Only by accident. But it was enough. The soldier and the secret had crossed a line that could never be undone. Outside the manor, rumors began to stir. Eric's second in command, Lieutenant Brandt, had begun to notice things. Eric's late returns, his long absences, his refusal to let anyone patrol the east wing of the house. One morning, as snow blanketed the fields, Brandt approached him. "You've been distracted lately, Captain." "I'm tired," Eric replied simply. "We're all tired. But you look haunted." Eric's jaw tensed. "Careful, Lieutenant." "Of course," Brandt smiled, but his eyes were sharp. "Just remember, the Reich doesn't forgive secrets." That night, Eric didn't go to the manor. He paced his quarters, torn between duty and longing, fear and desire. But when the clock struck midnight, he couldn't resist. He went. Elena was there, waiting. No words were needed. The fear in her eyes mirrored his own. "They're watching you, aren't they?" she whispered. "Yes." "Then don't come again." "You think I can stay away?" She stepped closer, so close he could feel her breath, the faint trace of soap and candle smoke. "You'll die for me." "I already am," he said. Then, for the first time, he kissed her. It was not a kiss of victory. It was one of surrender, a fragile, trembling confession beneath the thunder of war. Outside, the city burned. Inside, a soldier and a girl clung to the last piece of something the world had forgotten: love. By February of 1943, Berlin no longer looked like a city. It looked like a wound. The nights were red, the air smelled of smoke and iron. The Reich called it progress, the people called it survival, and in one forgotten manor on the outskirts of the city, two souls clung to each other, like light clings to glass before it shatters. Captain Eric Adler had learned to live with the ache of fear. Every knock at the door, every unfamiliar face on the street, every whisper in the barracks. It all reminded him that his secret could kill them both. But still, he went. Night after night. Sometimes, he brought her bread. Sometimes, a piece of chocolate from the officers' rations. Nantes, a book, Wuthering Heights, translated into German. He'd found it in a pile of confiscated belongings. "Do you believe in stories like these?" Elena had asked one night, her voice soft against the crackle of the fire. "I used to," Eric said. "And now?" "Now, I believe in things I can lose." She smiled sadly. "Then you believe in me." He wanted to say yes. Instead, he touched her cheek, the first time he dared to without his gloves. Her skin was cold, but her eyes burned with something that made him forget the world outside. One night, a storm rolled in. The kind that shook the earth like artillery fire. Elena played through it, her music louder than the thunder. Eric stood by the window, watching the snow blur the world into a white oblivion. "What happens when this ends?" she asked quietly, not looking up. "Wars end," he said. "People rebuild." "Not people like me." He turned, his voice trembling. "Then I'll rebuild you." She stopped playing. Don't promise things that can't survive a war, Eric. He took a slow breath and moved closer until their foreheads touched. I'm not promising survival, he whispered. I'm promising that you'll be loved. For a moment, time stopped. The war, the fear, the rules, all of it melted in the warmth between them. But then came a sound, sharp, unexpected. A door creaked downstairs. Eric froze. Elena's eyes widened. He drew his pistols silently, motioning for her to stay still. The footsteps echoed up the staircase, deliberate, heavy. Someone was inside. Then a voice, calm, cruelly polite. Captain Adler, are you alone? Lieutenant Brandt. Eric's blood turned to ice. He opened the door slightly, stepping into the corridor. What are you doing here, Brandt? I could ask you the same, the lieutenant said smoothly, his gloved hand resting on the banister. This house is off limits, isn't it? Eric forced a tight smile. Routine inspection, nothing more. Brandt's eyes flickered toward the door behind him, the faint light from the piano room spilling into the hall. Strange place for routine, sir. There was a long pause, the kind that makes the heart count too loudly. You've changed lately, Brandt said finally. Less like an officer, more like a man. Eric's jaw tightened. Careful what you imply. Brandt smiled thinly. Oh, I don't imply, Captain. I observe. He turned and walked away, his boots echoing down the corridor like a clock, counting down to something inevitable. When Eric re-entered the room, Elena was standing by the window, pale as snow. He knows, she whispered. Eric holstered his pistol. Not yet. Then soon. He walked to her, gripping her shoulders. I'll get you out of here. And go where? Anywhere but here. I have contacts. A resistance group near the border. They can hide you. Tears welled in her eyes. And you? He hesitated. I'll come for you. She shook her head. You won't survive that. Then I'll die knowing I tried. She looked at him for a long time, as if memorizing the lines of his face, the way he breathed her name. That night, she didn't play the piano. Instead, they sat in silence, the fire dying between them. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, love prepared for its own execution. The first snow of December fell over Munich, like a silken shroud, wrapping the war-torn city in deceptive peace. The church bells had gone silent weeks ago, their chimes replaced by the far-off growl of distant artillery. Yet inside a candlelit room above an abandoned bakery, Alara Vogel sat by the window, tracing her breath upon the frosted glass, waiting. For Lucas Adler had promised he would return before the snow melted. The crackle of the dying fire mirrored the restlessness in her heart. It had been 19 days since she last saw him, since that night in the rain when he whispered against her ear, "If I don't come back, promise me you'll still write about the light." But how could she, when every day grew dimmer and every letter she sent returned unopened, stamped with the black insignia of censorship? Outside, the street was eerily quiet. The air smelled of smoke and gunpowder, yet the stars still dared to shimmer faintly above the city, faint reminders that somewhere beyond the clouds, hope still existed. Then came a knock, 3 short taps, a pause, 2 more. Her heart froze. That was his code. Ilara rushed to the door, her fingers trembling as she unlatched the heavy bolt. And there he was, gaunt, shivering, in a soldier's tattered coat, his eyes wild with exhaustion, but unmistakably alive. "Lucas," she breathed, disbelief softening into tears. He stumbled in before she could finish, nearly collapsing into her arms. She caught him. The once strong soldier now weightless, like a memory slipping through her grasp. "I had to come," he whispered hoarsely, voice breaking. "They're coming, Alara. The Allies will enter Munich within days, but I couldn't leave without." He pulled something from inside his coat, a small leather notebook, its pages smudged and water-stained. "Your writings," he said, pressing it into her palms. "You once said words can survive where men cannot. Keep these safe. They're our truth." Tears blurred her vision as she opened it. Poems she thought were lost, reflections of love written in candlelight, hope scribbled between sirens. "But Lucas, you," he smiled faintly, a shadow of his former self. "I'm not staying. I have to lead them through the northern pass tonight. If I don't, others will die." Ilara shook her head violently, clutching his hand as if her grip could defy fate. "No, you can't go back. You've done enough. Stay, Lucas, please." The firelight caught his eyes, tired, resolute, impossibly tender. If I stay, Ilara, I betray everything I fought for. But if I go, at least I leave knowing you'll remember me not as a soldier, but as the boy who loved you in the quiet hours before the world fell apart. Snowflakes drifted through the cracked window as silence grew between them, not empty, but sacred. She leaned in, resting her forehead against his, tears trembling on her lashes. "Then let me remember you like this," she whispered. In the snow, under falling stars, he kissed her, softly, desperately, as if trying to leave a fragment of himself behind. Then, with the gentleness of a goodbye too heavy for words, he stepped out into the white night. Ilara stood there long after he disappeared, the cold seeping into her bones. Outside, the snow fell thicker, the city glowing faintly beneath the war-torn sky, and somewhere in the distance, gunfire echoed like the breaking of a heart. But in her trembling hands, the notebook remained, warm, alive, and eternal. The boy was gone. But the words, their words would live. Morning broke slowly over Munich, a pale, bruised light creeping through the cracks of a city that no longer recognized itself. Smoke still lingered from the east, mingling with the scent of burnt bread and snow. The war was drawing to an end, yet every sound, every echo of boots on cobblestone, still made Ilara flinch. She hadn't slept since that night. Lucas's scent still lingered on her scarf, faint traces of pine and gunpowder, the kind of smell that stays long after the person is gone. She'd sat by the window for hours, watching the snow melt, praying for a shadow, a figure, a miracle. But nothing came. Then, 3 days later, a soldier arrived, not Lucas, a stranger, uniform torn, eyes hollow with too many goodbyes. He carried a satchel. "Fraulein Vogel?" he asked softly. Ilara nodded, her voice trapped somewhere between fear and hope. The man bowed his head, removing his cap. He wanted me to give you this." From the satchel, he drew out a letter, sealed with a bullet casing pressed into wax. Lucas's handwriting curved across the front, smudged but unmistakable. Her knees weakened as she took it, fingers trembling. Where did you find him?" The soldier hesitated. "North Pass, near Obermargau. He saved 12 of us, drew the enemy fire so we could escape." He looked away, his jaw tightening. He didn't make it through the night. The room fell silent. Only the wind dared to speak. Ilara's tears came not with sound, but in a slow, steady stream, as if her heart had accepted something her mind still refused. After the soldier left, she sat by the fire, the letter trembling in her hands. She stared at it for what felt like hours before finally breaking the wax seal. The first line was written in haste, as if he knew he was running out of time. "My dearest Ilara, if this reaches you, it means the stars kept their promise." Her breath caught. She traced each word as though touching him through paper. "I have seen too much darkness, but your light never left me. Every shell that fell, every scream that echoed. I remembered the sound of your laughter in the bakery, the way flour dusted your hair like snow. That memory kept me human. If I fall, do not grieve for me as a soldier. Remember me as the boy who dreamed of peace, the one who believed your words could outlive the war." The ink began to fade toward the end, the handwriting shakier. But one last line stood bold, as if carved from his final breath. "Promise me, Ilara, when the world is quiet again, write." The letter slipped from her fingers as she wept, the firelight blurring through tears. She pressed the paper to her chest, whispering, I promise, Lucas." Outside, bells began to ring, distant at first, then louder, echoing across the ruins. The war had ended. The city was free. Yet freedom felt hollow without him. Ilara walked to the window, watching people pour into the streets, laughing, crying, embracing beneath the gray sky. But she couldn't bring herself to smile. She only whispered, as if he could hear her through the snow. "You kept your promise, Lucas. Now it's my turn." That night, she lit a candle, opened the leather notebook, and began to write about war, about love, about the courage to feel in a world that had forgotten how. Her words bled onto the page like prayers. "He died saving others, but in truth, he saved me. Love, even in war, was not weakness. It was resistance." As the candle flickered low, a single snowflake drifted through the broken pane and landed on the ink, melting slowly, like a tear from heaven. And far beyond the night, beyond the reach of memory, a boy who once believed in the stars finally rested. The year was 1947, 2 winters after the war's end. The world was rebuilding. Cities were learning to smile again, and laughter echoed where sirens once screamed. Yet in a quiet corner of Munich, a woman sat before a typewriter, the keys echoing softly like distant footsteps of ghosts she once knew. Ilara Vogel, the baker's daughter, who once dreamed of music and sunlight. Now, she was known as the woman who wrote about ghosts. Her manuscript lay thick beside her, nearly 600 pages of pain, love, and remembrance. The title, Letters from the Ashes. Every page carried Lucas's voice, every word, a fragment of the man who had taught her that love could survive bombs, that memory could outlast death. She didn't plan to publish it, not at first. It was too personal, too sacred. But the world had changed, and grief had become universal. People wrote to remember. Others wrote to forget. It was Herr Klein, the old bookseller, who found her manuscript by accident. "You cannot hide this," he told her gently, touching the stack of pages. "This isn't a story, Ilara. It's a requiem the world needs to hear." And so one rain-soaked morning, Letters from the Ashes went to print. By spring, her books spread like wildfire across post-war Europe. Women wept in train stations. Soldiers carried it in their coat pockets. It became more than a novel. It became a wound that everyone recognized but had never spoken aloud. Reviewers called it the voice of the broken generation. Others said it was too painful, too raw. But Ilara didn't read the reviews. She didn't attend the book events. She stayed in her small apartment, surrounded by silence, the same silence Lucas once feared. One evening, as dusk folded into night, there was a knock at her door. A young woman stood there, no older than 20. Her coat drenched with rain, her face was pale, but her eyes carried something achingly familiar. "Ilara Vogel?" she asked softly. Ilara nodded. "Yes." The girl reached into her satchel and pulled out a letter, yellowed and creased with time. This belonged to Captain Lucas Weber. Ilara froze. The name hit her like a storm. "Where did you get this?" The girl hesitated. "He was my father." The world seemed to tilt beneath Ilara's feet. "Your father?" The girl nodded, tears welling. "My mother was a nurse. They met before he was sent to the front. He didn't know she was pregnant when he left." Ilara felt her breath falter. Lucas had a child. The girl handed her the letter. "He wrote this before he died. My mother kept it until she passed last year. She told me to find you." With trembling hands, Ilara opened the letter. Lucas's words unfolded like a voice from heaven. "If my daughter ever reads this, tell her that she was born of love, not war. Tell her that I once knew a woman named Ilara, whose kindness reminded me that peace wasn't just an end to fighting. It was the way she looked at me when I spoke." Ilara pressed the letter to her lips. The tears came again, hot and relentless. The girl, Amara, knelt beside her. "Your book, it made me know him. Every word, every memory. You gave me a father I never met." Ilara smiled through her tears, touching the girl's cheek. "Then, he truly never died." That night, for the first time in years, Ilara didn't write. She simply sat by the fire with Amara, telling her stories about the bakery, the piano, the scarf he once stole to tease her. When the fire dimmed, she whispered, "He wanted me to write so others would remember. But maybe what he truly wanted was for me to live." And so Ilara began to live again. She reopened her father's old bakery, the same one where Lucas once laughed as flour dusted his boots. Amara helped her rebuild it, brick by brick, until the scent of bread once again filled the street that had forgotten how to smell like home. In the corner of the bakery sat an old framed photograph. Lucas, smiling in uniform, with Ilara's scarf wrapped around his neck. Below it, a simple line engraved in gold. "Love does not end when the war does." And every morning, as the bell above the bakery door chimed with each new customer, Ilara would glance at the photograph and whisper under her breath. But her words had already crossed borders, hearts, and time itself. Love had survived the war, and so had she. The year was 1956. nearly a decade after Alara Vogel reopened her little bakery on Rosenstrasse. Munich had healed in many ways. Its streets thrived with music again, laughter spilled from cafes, and the air no longer carried the metallic scent of fear. Yet, in a quiet attic above the bakery, a young woman named Amara Weber sat by a cracked window, reading through her father's old journal. The same journal Alara had kept sealed for years, until the day she believed Amara was ready. The pages smelled faintly of tobacco and rain, Lucas's handwriting elegant but hurried, as though each word was racing against time. To whoever finds this, my story does not end in the trenches. There is something I left behind, something that must be protected. I pray that one day, someone with my blood will find it and understand why I could not return. Amara's pulse quickened. The words were haunting, almost prophetic. Ilara, she whispered, descending the stairs where the older woman sat kneading bread. You knew about this. Ilara looked up, flowers streaking her cheek. About the journal, yes. But I never opened the final pages. I feared they held pain I could not bear to relive. Amara placed the journal on the table. He mentioned something he left behind, something important. Ilara frowned, her eyes shadowed with memory. Lucas was not only a soldier. Before the war, he was part of the Cultural Preservation Unit. He rescued stolen art from occupied towns. There were rumors of hidden works, manuscripts, even letters the Nazis planned to destroy. Do you think he hid them? Amara asked. Ilara hesitated. If he did, he would have hidden them where love once lived. Those words struck like a spark. Both women exchanged a knowing glance. The old farmhouse in Bavaria, the same place where Lucas and Ilara once sought refuge during the bombings. It was abandoned now, left to time and ivy. That very evening, under a sky of violet dusk, Ilara and Amara boarded the train toward the Bavarian hills. The rhythm of the wheels sounded like a heartbeat, fast, uncertain, alive. When they arrived, the house stood silent, half collapsed, the windows veiled by wild roses inside. Dust danced in the fading light. The scent of damp wood and memory filled the air. Amara walked toward the corner where a cracked piano still leaned against the wall. The same piano where Ilara once played for Lucas. Her fingers traced its keys. Ilara, she whispered, look. Beneath the piano bench, wrapped in oilskin, was a narrow wooden box. Ilara's hands trembled as she lifted it. The latch, though rusted, clicked open as if waiting for this moment. Inside were letters, dozens of them, tied in blue ribbon. Letters written not to Ilara, but from. Her tears filled her eyes. He kept them all, even the ones I thought never reached him. Amara's gaze fell on another bundle beneath, sealed envelopes marked, "To my daughter." Her voice faltered. "These are for me." They sat together by the cracked window as Amara opened the first. Lucas's handwriting bloomed like a whisper from the dead. "My Amara, if you ever find this, know that I loved you before you were born. I fought not for glory, but for the chance that you might grow up in a world where kindness is not a casualty. If you wish to find the truth of what I preserved, follow the map beneath the floorboard. It will lead you to the archives that should never have been forgotten." Amara looked beneath the letters and found a small hand-drawn map, ink fading but legible. "Ilara," she said, trembling. "It leads to the old monastery near Berchtesgaden." Ilara's voice quivered. The monastery was rumored to be a Nazi stronghold. Few dared return after the war, but Amara's resolve burned bright. He wanted me to finish what he couldn't. They journeyed through dense forests, mist coiling around the mountaintops like old secrets. The monastery loomed ahead, cold stone, broken bells, and silence, so deep it felt like the earth was listening. Inside, they found what time had tried to erase, a hidden chamber behind the altar. Within it, crates of artwork, journals and banned manuscripts wrapped in military tarps. Amara touched a painting, a woman holding a child, her eyes luminous with sorrow. Beneath it, a small brass tag read, "To the mothers who waited." Ilara whispered, voice breaking. "He saved them. He saved their stories." Tears streamed freely now. The discovery wasn't just about art. It was about remembrance. Lucas hadn't died trying to survive. He had died trying to preserve humanity itself. As they stood amid the relics of beauty nearly lost to war, A beam of golden light pierced through the shattered ceiling, falling upon them. Ilara turned to Amara and said softly, "He wanted the world to remember, and now, because of you, it will." Amara smiled through tears. "No, Ilara, because of you both. You taught him love and he taught me legacy." They spent days cataloging the findings, turning them over to historians, who wept at the magnitude of what they uncovered. Newspapers called it the Weber Archive, a miracle of lost art rediscovered. That winter, the world finally learned Lucas Weber's name, not as a soldier, but as a savior of stories. Ilara attended the exhibition's opening ceremony in Berlin. The last displayed artifact was a letter encased in glass, written by Lucas before his death. "If love survives war, then art survives time. Remember us. Not for what we lost, but for what we kept alive." As the crowd stood in reverent silence, Ilara felt something she had not felt since the war. Peace. And beside her, Amara whispered with trembling pride, "He finally came home, didn't he?" Ilara smiled, eyes glistening. "Yes, my dear. In every word, every painting, every tear, he came home." It was the spring of 1968, and Munich was alive again. The city that once crumbled beneath ashes now shimmered with music and hope. Yet in the attic of an old bakery on Rosenstrasse, silence reigned, the kind of silence born not of loneliness, but of peace. Ilara Vogel sat in her armchair by the window, a quilt draped across her knees, sunlight spilling across her silver hair. Time had softened her. The once fiery girl who played piano for soldiers was now a gentle figure surrounded by flowers and letters. On her lap rested a half-written note, her handwriting elegant but faint. "For Amara, my dearest. When you read this, I will be gone. But know that I did not leave you. I only walked ahead, to where he's been waiting." Her hand trembled as she signed it, a soft smile tracing her lips. Outside, cherry blossoms drifted through the air like snow. The same kind of spring petals that once fell the night she met Lucas. In the corner of the room stood a small wooden chest, carved with initials E and L. Inside, it were the mementos of 2 lifetimes. Lucas's medal, his letters, the ribbon that once tied their fate together, and a copy of Amara's new book. Because Amara Weber, now 30 years old, had done what both of them dreamed. She built the Weber Museum of Memory, a place where art, letters, and stories saved from the war lived on. Her book, The Letters Beneath the Fire, had become a phenomenon, translated across continents, read in schools, whispered about in tears. People said it wasn't just a book, it was a resurrection of humanity. And in every interview, Amara would say softly, "It began with 2 people who refused to let love die, even when the world demanded it." That morning, Amara arrived at the bakery. She called out, "Ilara, it's me." But only the sound of wind answered. Upstairs, she found her grandmother seated by the window, eyes closed, the letter still clutched in her hand. A faint smile lingered, serene, eternal. Tears blurred Amara's vision as she knelt, gently taking the note. Her hands shook as she opened it. "Do not weep for me, my darling. My life began the moment I met him, and it bloomed when I found you. You are our echo, Amara, the proof that love outlasts even war. Keep telling our story, for as long as stars burn." Beneath it, a small pressed flower, a violet, dried but intact. On the back, a single line in Lucas's handwriting. "You are the peace I fought for." The tears that followed were not of sorrow, but gratitude. Later that week, Amara stood before a vast crowd at the grand reopening of the Weber Museum. Her voice carried softly across the hall, where Lucas's letters and Ilara's writings lined the walls like sacred relics. They were ordinary people in extraordinary times. They taught me that love, real love, is not about possession or promise. It is about defiance. In a world that burns, to love is to rebuild. As applause swelled, sunlight streamed through the stained glass window, falling perfectly on Lucas's portrait, a young soldier with kind eyes, painted from memory. And for a fleeting moment, Amara thought she saw them, Lucas and Ilara, standing hand in hand at the edge of the crowd, smiling as if the years between had never existed. When she blinked, they were gone, but a soft wind stirred through the hall, carrying with it the faint scent of violets and old paper. That night, Amara returned home and sat by the bakery window, the same window where Alara once waited for Lucas's return. She took out her pen and began to write, her words flowing like quiet rain. Some love stories are not meant to be lived, they are meant to be remembered. And in remembering them, we keep the world human. As she closed the notebook, a small candle flickered beside her, a light against the dark, just as it had been for generations before her. Outside, the bells of Munich chimed softly, each note a promise that echoed through time. And somewhere, beyond war, beyond life itself, Ilara and Lucas danced beneath a sky of endless peace, their laughter carried by the wind, eternal as the love that survived them.